The rain was falling hard on the streets of Chicago that cold November evening. Through the tall glass windows of the Grand Marquis Hotel, warm golden light spilled out onto the wet sidewalk. Inside, hundreds of rich people in expensive clothes were gathering for the city's biggest charity event of the year. They were there to raise money for poor children who needed help with education. But outside in the rain, a real poor child stood watching them through the glass, her stomach empty and her worn sneakers soaked through with cold water. 12-year-old Maya Thompson pressed her small hands against the window, leaving foggy handprints on the cold glass. She had not eaten anything for 2 whole days, except for half a sandwich she found in a trash can near the park. Her dark skin was covered with drops of rain, and her old purple jacket that used to belong to someone else was too thin to keep her warm. But Maya was not looking at the fancy food being served on silver plates inside. Her eyes were fixed on something else entirely. In the corner of the grand ballroom stood the most beautiful thing she had ever seen since her world fell apart 6 months ago. It was a shiny black Steinway grand piano, its surface reflecting the light from a huge crystal chandeliers above. Maya's heart began to beat faster as memories flooded her tired mind. Before everything changed, before the fire that took away her home and her beloved grandmother, Maya had spent every single day of her life surrounded by music. Her grandmother, Eleanor Thompson, had been a music teacher for 40 years. She taught piano to children in their small apartment in the south side of Chicago. Eleanor could not afford to send Maya to expensive music schools, but she did not need to. Every morning, Maya would wake up to the sound of her grandmother playing Bach or Mozart on their old upright piano. By the time Maya was 4 years old, she could play simple melodies by ear. By 6, she was playing Mozart sonatas. By 10, she had won 3 state competitions for young pianists. Her grandmother used to say that Maya had a gift from God, that music lived inside her soul like blood lived in her veins. But all of that was before the fire, before the foster homes, before she ran away and ended up living on the streets because nowhere else felt safe. Standing outside the Grand Marquis Hotel, Maya made a decision that would change everything. She walked around to the service entrance where the catering staff was bringing in supplies. When nobody was looking, she slipped inside through the door. The warmth hit her immediately, making her shiver as her cold body adjusted to temperature. She could hear the sound of laughter and conversation coming from the main ballroom. Rich people talking about their vacations and their business deals while drinking champagne that cost more than most people made in a day. Maya knew she did not belong here. Her dirty clothes and messy hair made her stand out like a sore thumb, but she had to try. She had to get to that piano. Moving carefully through the hallways, trying to look like she belonged there, Maya finally reached the entrance to the main ballroom. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. The room was even more magnificent than it looked from outside. The ceiling was painted with beautiful angels and clouds. The walls were covered in gold decorations. And there in the corner sat the piano, calling to her like an old friend she had not seen in years. Maya walked toward it, her heart pounding in her chest. But before she could reach it, a loud voice stopped her cold. "Excuse me, what do you think you are doing here?" The voice belonged to Margaret Whitfield, the 50-year-old woman who had organized this charity event. She was wearing a red dress that probably cost more than most people's cars, and her blonde hair was styled perfectly in an elaborate updo. Her face showed disgust as she looked at Maya's appearance. "This is a private event for invited guests only. How did you get in here?" The entire room turned to look at Maya. Hundreds of eyes stared at her, some with curiosity, some with annoyance, and many with the same disgust that Margaret showed. Maya felt very small, like an ant being examined under a magnifying glass. But she had come too far to give up now. She lifted her chin and spoke in a clear voice that surprised even herself. "Can I play for food?" Maya asked, pointing at the piano. "I haven't eaten in 2 days. If I play you a song, just one song, could I please have something to eat?" The room erupted in whispers and gasps. Some people laughed out loud, finding the situation amusing. Others shook their heads in disapproval. A man in an expensive tuxedo spoke up loudly enough for everyone to hear. "She probably thinks this is some kind of restaurant with entertainment. These street kids have no idea about classical music or proper pianos." Margaret Whitfield stepped closer to Maya, her high heels clicking on the marble floor. "Little girl, this is a Steinway Model D concert grand piano worth more than $300,000. It's not a toy for homeless children to play with. We're trying to have a civilized event here to help underprivileged youth through proper channels, not handouts to beggars." "I know what kind of piano it is," Maya said quietly but firmly. "It's a Hamburg Steinway, probably built in the late 1990s based on the style of the legs and the music desk. The Model D is 9 feet long and has 274 keys and about 12,000 individual parts. I know, because I used to dream about playing one." The room fell silent for a moment. Margaret blinked in surprise, but quickly recovered her composure. "Anyone can memorize facts from the internet, child. That doesn't mean you can play. Now please leave before I call security." But something unexpected happened. An elderly man sitting near the piano stood up. He was Professor James Harrison, one of the most respected classical pianists in Chicago, who had been invited to perform later that evening. He had been watching Maya since she entered the room, noticing things others had missed. The way her fingers moved unconsciously, as if playing invisible keys. The way her eyes looked at the piano with genuine longing and recognition. The perfect posture she maintained despite her obvious exhaustion. "Wait a moment, Margaret," Professor Harrison said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent 60 years in the world of classical music. "Let the child play. What harm could it do? If she embarrasses herself, she'll leave. If by some chance she can actually play, then we should hear her. After all, isn't this event about giving opportunities to underprivileged youth?" Margaret's face turned red with anger and embarrassment. She did not like being contradicted in front of her guests. "James, look at her. She's filthy. She probably doesn't even know what middle C is. This is ridiculous." "Then you have nothing to worry about," Professor Harrison replied calmly. "Let her try. One song. If she fails, she leaves. If she succeeds, she gets a meal. That seems fair." The crowd began to murmur their agreement. Some were genuinely curious now. Others just wanted to see the drama unfold. Margaret realized she was trapped. If she refused now, she would look cruel and heartless at her own charity event. She forced a fake smile onto her face. "Fine," she said through gritted teeth. "One song. But when you fail, and you will fail, you leave immediately and never come back. Do you understand?" Maya nodded and walked toward the piano. Each step felt like a mile. Her legs were shaking, not from fear but from hunger and exhaustion. When she reached the bench, she sat down carefully, adjusting it to the right height with practiced ease. She placed her hands on her lap for a moment, closing her eyes and remembering her grandmother's words. "When you play, Maya, don't play for them. Play for the music itself. Play for the joy it brings to your heart." "Well," Margaret said impatiently, "we don't have all night. Play your little song, so we can get back to our evening." Maya placed her hands on the keys. The moment her fingers touched the ivory, something magical happened. It was like electricity running through her body. 6 months of pain, hunger, fear, and loneliness melted away. She was home. She was where she belonged. Without hesitation, she began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor filled the room. It was not a simple piece. It was one of the most challenging pieces in all of classical piano literature, requiring not just technical skill, but deep emotional understanding. The opening notes were soft, almost whispered, drawing everyone in. Then came the first theme, played with such delicate beauty that several people gasped audibly. Professor Harrison nearly dropped his champagne glass. He recognized not just the piece, but the level of artistry being displayed. This was not someone who had learned piano casually. This was someone who had been trained by a master, someone who understood not just the notes, but the soul of the music, the way she handled the difficult passages, the way she controlled the dynamics, the way she made the piano sing with an almost human voice. It was extraordinary. As Maya played, she disappeared into the music. She was no longer a homeless girl in a room full of rich strangers. She was a storyteller, painting pictures with sound. The dramatic sections crashed like thunder, making some people step back in shock. The gentle sections floated like whispers, bringing tears to eyes that had not cried in years. Her small hands flew across the keys with impossible speed during the virtuosic passages, never missing a note, never losing the melody within the complexity. Margaret Whitfield stood frozen, her mouth slightly open in disbelief. The confident sneer had disappeared from her face, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. She was watching her entire worldview crumble before her eyes. Everything she believed about class, about breeding, about who deserved to be in places like this, was being challenged by a 12-year-old girl in dirty clothes. The other guests were equally transfixed. Some had taken out their phones to record, recognizing that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Others simply stood in stunned silence, their expensive champagne forgotten in their hands. A few were crying openly, moved by the raw emotion in Maya's playing. As Maya reached the climax of the piece, where all the themes come together in a moment of transcendent beauty, she played with such passion that it seemed impossible such sound could come from one small girl and one piano. The music filled every corner of the grand ballroom, bounced off the painted ceiling, and entered the hearts of everyone present. It was not just a performance. It was a revelation. Professor Harrison had moved closer to the piano, tears streaming down his weathered face. In 60 years of playing and teaching, he had rarely heard Chopin's Ballade played with such combination of technical brilliance and emotional depth. He knew he was witnessing something special, something that might happen once in a generation. But more than that, he was witnessing a profound injustice. This child, this incredible talent, was homeless and starving while people in this very room spent thousands of dollars on shoes they would wear once. The final section of the ballade began, a whirlwind of notes that required incredible strength and control. Maya's thin arms, weakened by hunger, somehow found the power to deliver each note with crystal clarity. The coda arrived like a storm, fierce and unstoppable, building to final dramatic chords that she played with such force that the entire piano seemed to shake. And then silence. Maya kept her hands on the keys for a moment, her head bowed, breathing heavily from a physical and emotional effort. The silence in the room was complete. No one moved. No one breathed. It was as if time had stopped. Then, slowly, she turned on the bench to face the room. Professor Harrison was the first to break the spell. He began to clap, slowly at first, then faster and louder. Others joined him, one by one, until the entire room erupted in thunderous applause. People were cheering. Some were crying, and many looked ashamed of their earlier laughter and judgment. But Margaret Whitfield was not clapping. Her face had turned very pale, and she was gripping the back of a chair for support. She knew what had just happened. She had been exposed. Her prejudice, her cruelty, her small-mindedness had been laid bare for everyone to see. She had tried to humiliate a child, and instead, that child had revealed Margaret's own spiritual poverty. Professor Harrison walked over to Maya and knelt beside the piano bench, so he could look her in the eyes. "Child, what is your name?" he asked gently. "Maya Thompson," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Now that the music had ended, the reality of her situation was crashing back. "Maya, who taught you to play like that? You play like someone who has studied at the finest conservatories in the world." "My grandmother," Maya said, and for the first time that evening, her voice cracked with emotion. She was Eleanor Thompson. She taught piano for 40 years on the South Side. She died 6 months ago in a fire. I've been on my own since then. Professor Harrison's eyes widened. "Eleanor Thompson? I knew Eleanor. She was one of my students 40 years ago. She was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. She could have had a career as a concert pianist, but she chose to teach children in her community instead. She used to write to me about her granddaughter, said she was the most talented student she had ever taught." He paused, understanding dawning on his face. "You're the child she wrote about. The one, she said, would change the world with her music." Maya nodded, tears now flowing freely down her face. "She said music was my gift, but I haven't been able to play since she died. Tonight was the first time in 6 months. I just wanted to feel close to her again." The room had gone quiet again, but it was a different kind of silence. It was a silence of shame, of recognition, of hearts being changed. Several people were pulling out their wallets, want to help, but Professor Harrison raised his hand to stop them. Maya doesn't need your charity, he said, his voice carrying across the room. She needs what every brilliant artist needs: opportunity, respect, and recognition of her worth. I'm going to make some calls tonight. By tomorrow, Maya will have a full scholarship to the Chicago Conservatory of Music, including room and board. She'll have the best teachers, the best pianos, and most importantly, the chance to share her gift with the world. Margaret Whitfield finally found her voice. You can't just make decisions like that, James. There are procedures, application committees. Margaret, Professor Harrison said, turned to face her with steel in his eyes. In my entire career, I have never heard a 12-year-old play Chopin's Ballade No. 1 with such mastery. Most professional pianists struggle with that piece. What we just witnessed was not just talent, it was genius. And you wanted to throw her out because she was hungry and her clothes were dirty. You should be ashamed of yourself. The criticism hit Margaret like a physical blow. Several of her supposed friends nodded in agreement with Professor Harrison. She could feel her social standing crumbling around her. She had organized this charity event to make herself look good, to be seen as generous and caring. Instead, she had revealed herself to be shallow and cruel. A woman in the crowd stepped forward. It was Rebecca Chun, a food critic for the Chicago Tribune, who had been invited to cover the event. I recorded the entire thing, she announced, including the part where Mrs. Whitfield tried to humiliate a starving child who turned out to be a musical genius. I think my editor will be very interested in this story. Margaret's face went from pale to bright red. You can't publish that. I'll sue. For what? Telling the truth? Rebecca replied. You organize a charity event for underprivileged youth, and then try to kick out an actual underprivileged youth who happens to be extraordinarily talented. The irony is too perfect to ignore. While the adults argued, Maya sat quietly on the piano bench, overwhelmed by everything that was happening. 6 months ago, she had lost everything. Her grandmother, her home, her music, her sense of belonging in the world. She had survived on the streets by becoming invisible, by not drawing attention to herself, by forgetting who she really was. But tonight, the music had called her back to herself. Her grandmother had always said that music would save her one day. Maya had thought those were just nice words, but now she understood. Music had not just saved her from hunger tonight. It had saved her soul. Professor Harrison returned to Maya's side. Are you hungry, dear? Let's get you some food. And then, if you're willing, I'd like you to meet some people. Good people who understand and appreciate true talent. Your life is about to change, Maya. Your grandmother would be so proud. As Maya stood up from the piano bench, she touched the keys one more time, silently thanking the instrument for giving her voice when she had none. She looked around the room at all the faces, some friendly, some ashamed, some still in shock. Then she saw Margaret Whitfield standing alone, abandoned by her friends, her carefully constructed image in ruins. Maya walked over to her. The room held its breath, wondering what the child would say to the woman who had tried to humiliate her. Maya looked up at Margaret with eyes that held no anger, only pity. My grandmother used to say that money can buy many things, but it can't buy a beautiful heart, Maya said softly. She said that true wealth is in how we treat others, especially those who have less than us. I feel sorry for you, Mrs. Whitfield. You have everything, but you're poorer than I've ever been. With that, Maya walked away, leaving Margaret standing alone with her shame. Professor Harrison led Maya to a table full of food, and she ate slowly, savoring every bite. Around her, people approached cautiously, wanted to talk to her, to apologize for their initial judgment, to offer help. But Maya was focused on the food and on the warm feeling in her chest that told her everything was going to be okay. Later that evening, after Maya had eaten her fill and met dozens of people who suddenly wanted to know her, Professor Harrison made an announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, I know tonight didn't go as planned, but perhaps it went exactly as it needed to. We've learned an important lesson about prejudice and assumptions. This young lady, Maya Thompson, will be performing a full recital at Orchestra Hall next month as part of the Young Artist Series. I hope you'll all attend and support her. And I hope you'll remember what you witnessed tonight the next time you're tempted to judge someone by their appearance. The announcement was met with enthusiastic applause. Margaret Whitfield had already left, unable to bear the shame any longer. Her charity event would be remembered, but not for the reason she had hoped. It would be remembered as a night a homeless girl with extraordinary talent exposed the hypocrisy of high society. 3 months later, Maya stood backstage at Orchestra Hall, wearing a beautiful blue dress that Professor Harrison's wife had bought for her. She was no longer homeless, no longer hungry, no longer alone. She lived in a nice dormitory at the conservatory, studied with the best teachers, and practiced on beautiful pianos every day. But more importantly, she found a new family in the music community, people who valued her for her talent and her spirit, not her clothes or her background. As she walked on the stage to thunderous applause, Maya saw Professor Harrison in the front row, beaming with pride. Next to him sat Rebecca Chun, who had written a series of articles about Maya that had touched hearts across the city. There were hundreds of people in the audience, including many young students from the South Side who had been inspired by her story. Before she began to play, Maya spoke into the microphone. "This concert is dedicated to my grandmother, Eleanor Thompson, who taught me that music is the language of the soul. She also taught me that everyone deserves dignity and respect, regardless of their circumstances. 6 months ago, I was homeless and hungry. Tonight, I stand before you as proof that talent and determination can overcome any obstacle, but only when given the chance. Thank you to everyone who saw past my appearance that night at the Grand Marquis Hotel and recognized my worth as a human being and as an artist." As Maya began to play, filling Orchestra Hall with the same magic that had stunned the charity event, she thought about how the title of her story had come true in ways she never expected. "Can I play for food?" had been a desperate question from a starving child. But it had become something more. It had become a challenge to society's assumptions, a testament to the power of music, and ultimately, a triumph for the human spirit. The headline in the Chicago Tribune the next day read, "Can I play for food?" They laughed at the homeless girl, not knowing she's a piano prodigy. The subtitle continued, "How Maya Thompson's courage and talent exposed the ugly truth about prejudice in high society and changed her life forever." Margaret Whitfield read the article alone in her mansion, surrounded by expensive things that no longer brought her joy. She had lost most of her friends and her position in various charity organizations. But more than that, she had lost the illusion that she was a good person. Maya's words haunted her. "You have everything, but you're poorer than I've ever been." For the first time in her privileged life, Margaret understood what true poverty meant. It was not about money or possessions. It was about the absence of compassion, the lack of humanity, the emptiness of a heart that had forgotten how to see the worth in every human being. Meanwhile, Maya Thompson continued to play, her music touching hearts and changing minds wherever she performed. She had learned that sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised in the most unlikely packages, and that music, true music that comes from the soul, has the power to break down every barrier that humans create. Her grandmother had been right all along. Music had saved her. But more than that, it had given her the power to save others, to open eyes, to change hearts, and to prove that talent, dignity, and worth exist in every corner of humanity, waiting only for the chance to be heard. The story of the homeless girl who asked, "Can I play for food?" became a legend in Chicago and beyond. It reminded people that genius can emerge from any circumstances, that prejudice blinds us to miracles standing right in front of us, and that sometimes all someone needs to change the world is a chance to share their gift. Maya Thompson got that chance because she had the courage to ask a simple question, to face rejection and humiliation, and to let her talent speak louder than any words ever could. Years later, when Maya became one of the most celebrated pianists in the world, she always remembered that night at the Grand Marquis Hotel. She established a foundation in her grandmother's name that provided free music education to children from underprivileged backgrounds. And whenever she met a young person who felt invisible, worthless, or forgotten by society, she would tell them her story. She would remind them that everyone has a gift, everyone has worth, and sometimes all it takes is the courage to ask for the chance to prove it. The title of her autobiography, published on her 18th birthday, was the same question that had changed her life. Can I play for food? But now everyone knew the answer. Yes, she could play. She could play with such beauty, passion, and skill that she could move mountains, change hearts, and prove that true wealth has nothing to do with money and everything to do with the music that lives in every human soul, waiting for its moment to be heard. And in a small apartment on the south side of Chicago, a young girl who had heard Maya's story sat at an old upright piano, practicing scales with determination in her eyes. Because if Maya Thompson could go from homeless to orchestra hall, then maybe, just maybe, dreams really could come true for anyone brave enough to chase them. The music continued, flowing from one generation to the next, carrying with it the eternal truth that talent knows no boundaries. Genius recognizes no social class, and a human spirit, when given a chance, can soar beyond any limitation that society tries to impose. This is a story of Maya Thompson, the girl who asked, "Can I play for food?" And in doing so, fed not just her body but the souls of everyone who heard her play. It is a reminder that we should never judge by appearances, never underestimate the human capacity for excellence, and always give people a chance to show us who they really are. Because sometimes the most extraordinary gifts come in the most ordinary packages, waiting only for someone to say, "Yes, you can play."